So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Russia seeking to recruit foreign volunteers to fight in Ukraine, and also they're looking to get mercenaries. Russia is recruiting mercenaries. So we'll talk about this article first, and then we're going to talk a bit about this gentleman here, Ramzan Kadyrov. That's how you pronounce it. So this is scary for multiple reasons, and I'll talk about why at the end of this specific article. So Vladimir Putin has called for foreign volunteers to be able to fight against Ukrainian forces, and if they're not paying them anything, which it does look like based on certain reading, they are. These volunteers are going to be people who want to essentially commit murder. That's the only reason why you'd volunteer to join the war, unless you did so on the Ukrainian side to protect Ukraine. If you're joining on the Russian side, the invader side, the aggressor side, you're looking to murder people, really. And you could say the framing there is very dodgy. I don't care. Speaking at a Russian Security Council meeting, he said those who wanted to volunteer to fight with Russian-backed forces should be allowed to. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said there were 16,000 volunteers in the Middle East ready to fight alongside Russian-backed forces. And the question is, why would so many people in the Middle East volunteer to fight? If we're assuming it's for money, it would make sense. I don't know what the state of the Syrian army is going to be. Considering that, I think their war with ISIS is pretty much over. So it could be the case that the Syrian government is looking to demobilise. So these fighters would go to a different country because they need the money. Or it might be that they see this as some sort of holy war against, a country that is led by a Jew. Zelensky is Jewish, which doesn't make sense if you believe it's run by Nazis as well, But I've seen a video that talked about how these people want to go. Certain people from the Middle East want to go there because they want to attack Ukraine because it is their elected representative is Jewish, which is just sad, to be honest, and it just shows you how rife anti-Semitism is in the world still. US officials said that these could include Syrians skilled in urban combat because they've been having to fight ISIS in cities for many years now. Moscow is a long-standing ally of Syria, and Mr. Putin has been a key backer of Bashar al-Assad in the country's civil war. I think Russia in the end really bailed out Assad when things were looking very dicey for him. If you see that there are these people who want their own accord, of their own accord, not for money, to come help the people living in Donbass, why would the people living in Aleppo care about the people in Donbass? What? There's no historical link there. Then we need to give them what they want and help them get to the conflict zone, Mr. Putin told his defense minister, which again, it just doesn't make sense. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, responding in a video message, said thugs from Syria would be coming to kill people in a foreign land, which he's right about. These people have no reason to go to Ukraine. Foreign fighters, including former and British army personnel, have been arriving in Ukraine to fight for the government in Kyiv, which, that can cause problems in itself once these people come back. And it causes other problems, I think, with kind of Western forces kind of going there of their own accord. Hopefully their own accord anyways. Charles Lister, an analyst with the US-based Middle Eastern Institute, questioned how useful Syrian forces would be to Mr. Putin. If Assad's regime begins sending troops to Ukraine, there will be no more than cannon fodder in a battle and environment that's completely alien to them. The weather in Syria is very, very different to the weather in Ukraine, especially as we're still in kind of the winter entering the spring. It's going to be very difficult for them to kind of operate in these kind of temperatures. Also, the language barrier is a key problem. They would, the Syrian fighters predominantly would be speaking Arabic or some form of Arabic, whilst obviously Russians don't speak that. So it could be quite dangerous, to be honest, unless they're in their own kind of units, which would make sense. There is no evidence of actual recruitment of Syrians having taken place, he added, which is quite interesting. According to the Wall Street Journal, US officials have told the paper that Russia has recently been recruiting fighters from Syria, hoping that expertise in urban warfare can help take Kyiv and deal a devastating blow to the Ukrainian government. Which, the reason why this scares me a lot is the fact that we've seen videos of Russian soldiers in Ukraine being kind of very timid around the people of Ukraine, because these people told, at least from the looks of it anyways, it's speculation on my part, they were told they'd be welcomed in by the people of Ukraine in order to free them from, the quote-unquote Nazis, when we know Ukraine's not a Nazi country. The Nazi parties don't do well in Ukrainian elections, and lest we forget, the leader of the country is Jewish. Nazis hate Jews the most. So it doesn't make sense, and that's why this kind of scares me, because those Russians, there was a video of a Russian soldier getting into an argument with some old lady where he looked very timid and he did not want that confrontation, whilst these fighters from Syria will not see it like that. If it's the case that Russia sees Ukraine as a sibling nation, and so these soldiers won't be that willing to to fire at civilians, which we've seen evidence of them shelling cities, which is a bit different because they're away from the exact front line. But point being is that the Syrians that go to Ukraine, if they do, will not see these Ukrainian citizens as kind of a brother nation. They'll see them as Westerners, non-Muslims, etc., which is very scary. There's a bit in Metal Gear Phantom Pain where they talk about how the Russian soldiers would see the Afghan people as very different and they won't be as hesitant to fire on them. We've seen situations where soldiers are asked to fire on their own kind of countrymen and women, and they struggle to do that. That was one of the reasons why the 1905 revolution in Russia was so successful, is that the army essentially just didn't want to fight their own people in Russia. And so if a revolution does happen in Russia, it's going to be very, very interesting. So that's kind of the point I want to make around this article. This is why I want to cover it, because it is very scary. We'll go to the Kadyrov point next, because that kind of links into this. Ramzan Kadyrov runs the kind of Chechen area in Russia, and he's very homophobic. Amongst other things, he's a very brutal dictator of his region. And there are stories about Kadyrov says he's in Ukraine, but apparently his phone shows he's not in Ukraine. So it's very hard to know if it's actually true. He's saying he is, but the fact is, if he is there, he will not see Ukraine as a sibling nation, and that's what's scary. The Chechen soldiers will not see this as a sibling nation. I think they'll see it as a nation to take over essentially, and they'll be very brutal in that context. But I've seen a video where Chechen soldiers kind of just standing around because they don't know what to do, because they haven't been given proper orders. This whole war has been a real mess for Russia in terms of militarily speaking, because the logistics have been terrible. They have no idea what they're doing, really. And maybe the Russian military is more of a paper tiger than we first thought, especially since they're hiring mercenaries to fight. So social media channels and private messaging groups are being used in Russia to recruit a new brigade of mercenaries to fight in Ukraine alongside the army, the BBC has learned. And when it comes to countries that are gearing up for war or who are in war, the war economy takes precedent over everything. So especially given a lot of Russians might lose their jobs because of the fact that Russia's out of SWIFT, so it kind of kills Russia's exports to an extent. And also the fact that they may have lost their jobs because of that, or other factors in Russia. So they might be forced to join the military because that's the only thing that pays, or mercenary groups because, again, they are the only things that pay, which is a very dangerous thing. And it will weaken the Russian military because, again, it'd be just people sent for cannon fodder. But also the fact that if you start sending in people whose expertise you really need, that can cause problems in itself. But it just depends on what they're doing. The BBC has spoken to a serving mercenary and a former fighter with close links to one of Russia's leading mercenary organizations, who have shared details of the recruitment campaign. The serving mercenary said many veterans of the secretive Wagner organization were contacted on a private Telegram group a few weeks before the start of the war. So essentially, even before the war started, Russia were looking to recruit mercenaries, which is not very promising for the Russian military, especially the allure of the Russian military as well. People didn't want to join it, and it looks like they'd rather join mercenary groups because perhaps the pay is better. The message appeals to those with criminal records, debts, banned from mercenary groups, or without an external passport to apply. So they're desperate, looking for criminals, people in debt, people who are desperate financially, or mercenary groups that have been banned, or those without a passport essentially to apply, so those who can't leave Russia. The message also included that those from Russian-occupied areas of Luhansk and Donetsk republics and Crimea cordially invited. So obviously Luhansk and Donetsk are not republics, and Crimea is also Russian-occupied territory. So essentially they're looking for volunteers or people to join the mercenary group because they're desperate. The serving mercenary spoke to the BBC, which is very surprising, which does give me some pause. Said new recruits are being placed in units under the command of officers from the GRU. So the GRU are an agency of the KGB. It's the main directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. He stressed that the recruitment policy has changed and fewer restrictions were applied. They are recruiting anyone and everyone, he said, unhappy with what he described as the lower professionalism of the new fighters. So maybe that's the reason he's talking to the BBC, because his kind of mercenaries have been diluted with mainly volunteers, not volunteers, but low rank soldiers, essentially, when he might want to run a more professional outfit, which just a really weird. The words coming out of my mouth just don't make sense, at least in my mind, anyways. Point being is that, you know, I think they've been told just hire as many people as you can, and I would not be surprised if the Wagner Group have been paid, you know, a massive fee in order to get more fighters to the front lines. But obviously, this person here is not very happy with the professionalism of soldiers who he's going to have to rely on in the front lines. The Wagner Group have faced repeated accusations of human rights abuses and war crimes in its operations in Libya and Syria. So I'm very surprised they'd be operating in that. They would have operated in Libya, but in Syria it doesn't surprise me at all. And it does tell you that they must have strong links to the Russian government if they were used in previous operations in Syria. So you've got the Wagner base. I'm assuming this is the city, and the Russian military base, geographically very, very close to each other. As well as private messaging groups, there have also been a public campaign in Russia to recruit mercenaries. On the Russian social media group platform VK, a page that describes itself as a specialist in security activities, posted an advert during the first week of the invasion calling for security guards from other former Soviet Union countries to apply for the near abroad. The near abroad is obviously a reference to Ukraine because it's very close geographically to Russia. Very interesting, they've gone to former Soviet countries, and also, you know, calling for security guards. So I'm assuming they're not talking about people who you know, look after shopping centres and things like that, etc. I think they're looking for, you know, people who have armed training with weapons. Previously, a criminal record was a block for those wanting to join the mercenaries, which makes sense. Also, restrictions were placed on anyone born outside of Russia because of doubts around loyalty, but essentially that's been scrubbed. Because evidently they are desperate. You know, this is translated from the VK social media website. At the request of the workers, a set of guards for the near abroad is open. Restrictions on the place of birth, except for Georgia, debts, travel abroad for this particular direction are removed. So essentially, like we mentioned earlier, you can pretty much join if you're Russian or if you live in former Soviet countries by the looks of it, except for Georgia. It's interesting, Georgia have been excluded. It might be because of their attempts to join NATO. Maybe that's the reason for it. There is a high demand on fighters, and to make a difference on the ground, they're going to need to be thousands of mercenaries, said Jason Blazakis, Senior Research Fellow at the Sufan Center, a US-based security think tank. On Friday, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that 16,000 fighters from the Middle East had volunteered with the Russian army. I doubt it's that many, quote, volunteers. It'd be people looking to get paid. The serving Wagner fighter explained that in the first days of the invasion in Ukraine, he was sent to the country's second city, Kharkiv, where he said his unit successfully completed a mission without revealing what it was. So, okay, you know, they were paid $2,100 or £1,600 for a month's work and returned home to Russia. So that's not that's a decent salary, or at least I don't know for mercenaries, but in terms of money, especially in a country as poor as Russia, it's okay money. Just gonna whip out my calculator just to calculate it. So do 1,600 divided by 4, about £400 a week in the UK. So that would be okay if you lived in the UK, but I'm assuming in Russia it would be a very, very good amount. Blazakis describes using mercenaries as a sign of desperation to keep the Russian public support. I don't know if keeping mercenaries would keep the public support, because you'd be paying people more than you probably pay your own military to fight for you, and also the fact that, you know, people are going to know mercenaries come at a cost, especially when, you know, Russia's suffering from rising interest rates and problems around getting food, etc. Will these people be happy that the Russian government is paying people to fight in a war that's not very popular already, rather than giving money to Russians to help them with their cost of living crisis? I don't know. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has stirred several protests in Russia. The thing is, right, and people keep asking the question, why don't more people protest in Russia? Some of these people wouldn't be even aware of the situation in Ukraine, what's going on, but for the people who do protest, by the looks of it, they are arrested and beaten up. And, you know, it goes Now, as much as protesting is very important, the simple fact is I would never advocate for anyone to put themselves in a situation where they'd get arrested and especially beaten by the police or even disappeared. I would never advocate for that. And if anyone is advocating for more Russians to protest, if they know the situation that they're going to be arrested and potentially beaten, you're a bad human being. Moscow has always denied any links with mercenary groups. Well, mercenary groups aren't denying links with you, pal. The BBC asked the Russian Ministry of Defense whether the base in Molkino was being used to recruit additional forces for what the Russian authorities call a special operation in Ukraine, which is, go invade Ukraine. No response was received. Shocker. So this group, geographically speaking, are very close to the Russian military base. It very much looks like Russia are hiring mercenaries, as well as looking at, quote, foreign volunteers, which shows you the desperation of the Russian government that essentially they don't have the forces at hand to deal with Ukraine at the moment. That kind of further feeds in to the slowness of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the repeated stories of the struggles to take over. The amount of soldiers that are being killed in this Russian invasion is a very, very high amount. And eventually you run out of people, be it the Ukrainian military or the Russian military. You will eventually run out of people, and that's where things get really dicey. The Russian invasion is not very popular. Vlad is, I don't think, doing too great. And eventually, I think people in Russia could get sick of this war, because they might see it in the end, like, even if the ones that see this as denazification of Ukraine, they might see it as it's just not worth it, because their lives are being hit so badly because of the sanctions and other things that they're struggling to live. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.